I live in Spain between 4 and 6 months out of every year, and I live in Florida the other 4 to 6 months. Today, I'm taking a deep dive to share with you the story about what got me to this point. Then we'll talk about what it's like to live between two places, have two communities, and travel for a chunk of the year too. Plus, I'll talk about taxes, residency, and the reasons I've decided for now to keep my US residency. Hi, my name is Nicole. Welcome to my channel, Travel to Money, where I share about how to travel, adventure, and have fun on the road to financial independence, especially if that road is leading you to Spain. Okay, so let me share a bit of my backstory briefly to explain how I got here today. I never really had a plan to live equally between two different countries, but one decision after another and making adjustments along the way has landed me in this very unique situation. Back in 2017, I owned a home in Florida, but began to rent it out on Airbnb while I traveled the world for a while. My job was remote before remote work was really a thing. Most of my travel was based in Europe, and I just fell in love with Europe. The history, the vibrant cultures, the food, it was amazing. And when I was in Italy, staying in a little Airbnb built into the side of a mountain in a very small village, I decided to look up the cost of homes similar to that one. This is just one of the ways that the internet and Google has changed my life. It was then that I found a few houses in this same village in Italy that needed a little work for around 30,000 euro. I had never heard of homes for the price of a new car, and that's where the dream of owning a home in Europe began for me. And here is lesson number one. Don't marry yourself to a specific plan. Be willing to make changes and adjustments as you learn and grow. It wasn't until a few days later that I thought to search other areas in Europe. I found cheap homes in Greece, Spain, Portugal, and France. Homeownership in another country had just never crossed my mind before, and I'd also never seen anyone else in my life become a homeowner overseas. But it was just a light bulb moment for me. So I'm the kind of person who has a new idea every 5 minutes. I love to get excited about something, do a lot of research, and then probably 98% of the time, I don't pursue the thing I just got excited about. But then every once in a while, a dream sticks. So that first year of solo travel, I ended up cutting my time in half and heading back home after about 5 months. Honestly, I was pretty homesick, but 24 hours after being home, I wished I was traveling again. The truth about that kind of lifestyle is that you just can't have it all. You can't have full-time travel and in-person connection with your community. So while I may be enjoying one, I'm always longing for the other. And that is a hard realization to come to. When I'm home with my people, I'm longing for travel. And when I'm traveling, I'm longing for home. I think the experience of travel and building a life in a new community has really helped me to identify patterns in my own life and better understand why I make the choices I do. I digress. Okay, so where were we? I got back to Florida, where I owned a home at the time that I was renting out on Airbnb, and I was making so much money from that rental that I decided not to move back into the house. A few months later, a hurricane hit Florida and my house was spared. But it was a close call, and I definitely had to deal with some damage and cleanup. But a few months later, I was in Colorado for some work meetings when one of my coworkers said, "So Nicole, what are you doing next?" I'm kind of known for always being up to something new. I don't honestly know if I really meant it at the time, but I was feeling kind of stuck and I just wanted to deliver an answer that would make someone go, "Wow, that's awesome." So even though I didn't have the money for it at the moment, I said, "I'd really love to buy a house in Europe. Let me show you how cheap they can be." It was then that I Googled cheap houses in Spain. And the very first house that popped up was in good shape and had incredible views and was listed for just under 20,000 euros. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't stop looking at it. And this was the moment that I took one of my million ideas from dream to action. I had no idea if I could even buy a house in Spain and what the laws were. I hadn't even fully decided that Spain was definitely the place in Europe that I wanted to buy. And the real kicker is that I didn't have 20,000 euros or dollars for that matter. So the first thing I did was try to understand if a US citizen could in fact buy a house in Spain and what the process was. I did some research on Google, and I was encouraged by the fact that after visiting several different websites, the steps to purchase a home seemed straightforward and consistent. This definitely gave me a level of confidence. Then I called my bank and asked if I could take out a personal loan for $25,000. I knew I had good credit, and this was really the only way I'd be able to purchase this house. The bank approved me, and I think the interest rate was around 11%, so I knew I'd need to work to pay off the loan faster than the 5-year term they gave me. The monthly payment was set at $500. Before processing the loan, I asked them to hold that approval for me. Next, I called the agent who was selling the house, and I was very fortunate that he was originally from the UK, so it was really easy to communicate with him. I told him I was interested in the house and wanted to understand more about it. He was very upfront with me about the property and basically said that the street wasn't very good and even suggested that I look at other properties. Because he mentioned that the street wasn't very good, my only concern was if it was going to be safe. So I asked him if it was safe, and he said yes. And when he mentioned that maybe I should consider other properties, I said, I have $25,000. And he said, well, then this is the house for you. I called the bank, had them process the loan. I sent a wire transfer of $2,000 as a deposit to put the house on hold for me. And then the agent introduced me to an attorney who is still my attorney today. I sent some information to the attorney so he could start working on the details of getting my tax identification number in Spain, and I scheduled a flight to Spain for 30 days later. There was another party who was interested in the house, and me putting down that $2,000 was the way I could make sure that the house was held for me and showed that I had the intent to buy it. To me, it was worth putting that money down without having seen the house in person. At the end of the day, if I end up out $2,000, it's not really the end of the world. The upside was definitely worth it. And I think this is lesson number 2 and 3. Number 2 is trust your gut. Number 3 is the greatest rewards usually come with some level of risk. You just have to know your own risk tolerance. Okay, so now I own a home in Spain. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. A few months later, I got back to the US. I was still renting my home in Florida on Airbnb, and that was going pretty well, but I began to feel a little unsure about my financial situation. And here's why. I had a mortgage in the US, and I had this extra $500 per month payment on the house in Spain. I worked for a nonprofit, and my income from that alone would not have been enough to cover both the mortgage and the house in Spain if anything went wrong with my Airbnb income. And because of the hurricane we had just had in Florida a few months before, I was feeling nervous about what would happen if we had another hurricane that did more damage. I really couldn't go without renting that house for several months in a row. And this is where I have one of my biggest regrets. I didn't like the feeling of living in fear about being overextended, so I decided to sell my house in Florida. I made a small profit on it, but if I had kept that house, it would be worth almost $200,000 more just a few years later. It makes me sick to think about it. And although I'm a risk taker, I honestly wasn't enough of a risk taker in that situation. If I could go back, I would have kept that house and risked the chance of a major disaster. After about 6 months, I decided to take off and travel again, as well as spending more time at my house in Spain, this time taking off with one of my best friends. After about 9 months of travel and spending time in Spain, I went back to the US. And that, of course, is when the pandemic hit. I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way, but the pandemic changed the course of a lot of things for me. This is where I decided to really take hold of my finances in a way I hadn't done before. I went back to work at the second job where I lived on property, effectively ensuring I had 2 incomes and almost no bills. While many people were stuck at home, I spent that time busier than I'd ever been in my life, working one full-time job remotely and another full-time evening job that was in person. And my goal was to be debt-free and to really bump up my retirement savings, which to that point had been very little. I had about $50,000 in debt, including the personal loan for the house in Spain, and the entirety of almost every paycheck went to paying that off, which meant that in less than a year, probably about 7 or 8 months, I was able to pay off that debt. I started putting bigger and bigger amounts into my 401k and brokerage accounts. Let me tell you something. If you earn an average or below average income and you are in debt, the road to get out of debt can seem really long. But if you can put in some tremendous effort and make sacrifices for a relatively short period of time, you can make a huge dent in your financial situation. But the thing about this period of time was not even so much that I was able to pay off all of my debt and boost my retirement, but it changed my whole mentality about money, hustle, investing, and more. And even though the work has changed in some ways, I'm almost addicted to the hustle in a way that I'm now having to learn to balance. Still out here learning lessons and making adjustments to be better at doing life. It was during that season that I decided to start this YouTube channel about travel, adventure, and financial independence, which brings me to another adjustment I'm having to make right now. When I started this channel, I already owned my first home in Spain, but I didn't think of that as a major draw for people. And when I bought my second home in Spain, the one next door for €5,000, an Instagram video I made about that went viral, and I'm so thankful for that. But it's really forced me to reframe my business, Travel to Money. Because of that one video, the majority of my audience, you, are exclusively interested in content about Spain. I wanted to continue posting about it all, but that's just not really the way YouTube is built. So as of right now, like this week, I'm updating my main channel to be titled Travel to Money Spain and have created 3 new channels, Travel to Money Fi, Travel to Money World Travel, and Travel to Money Drone Views of Spain. If I'm being really honest, this is a pain, but I should have done it a long time ago. I've hurt my business by being reluctant to change my plans as I've learned, but better late than never. In the description of this video, I'm going to leave the links to all of those new channels, and if any of those are areas of interest for you, I'd love for you to subscribe and follow where it's most helpful for you. So as the pandemic ended, life over those 2.5 years had really changed. My best friend from Portugal who had been traveling with me moved to Australia for a new adventure, and my own life had become more rooted again in the US, mainly because for those years I had no other choice. So after I left my second job, I decided to rent a space in Orlando with a couple of friends and turn an independent part of the building into an Airbnb. And it was then that I learned that although I love making the money from Airbnb, I do not like being the actual property manager. It was great while I was traveling the world and paid someone else to run it, but with this particular property, the only way it made financial sense was to run it myself, and wow, that was not fun. Over those 2 years, I was trying to decide what life was going to look like as it pertains to Spain, travel, and how much time I would spend in Florida. I had a lot to consider. Where do I like to spend my time? Do I, in fact, need community? What are my followers most interested in? I met with my landlord to discuss the upcoming lease, and that's when he informed me that the owner had decided to sell the house, which meant I needed to figure out if I really wanted roots in Florida. I really don't like renting. Long story short, I bought a condo in Tavares, Florida, which is about 45 minutes outside of Orlando. I'm not going to get into the details of the condo purchase, but if you want to see why I decided to buy this condo and my plans to pay off the mortgage in 5 years, you can watch my full video on that, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. Last year was my first year owning the condo, which needed a very small amount of renovation. During 2024, I traveled to Guatemala for my full-time job, to San Antonio at least 4 times to visit family, to Chicago twice to see close friends who moved away, to Spain twice, to Costa Rica for vacation, and I also took a solo train trip through Switzerland and Italy. I went to a wedding in France, and on my way out of Spain, I stopped in Paris for a weekend. Not only did I do all of that travel plus purchase and move into the new condo, I was also still renovating the house in Spain. And do you know what I learned last year? It was too much. So that brings us up to date. My current plan is to spend every winter in Florida, spring in Spain, part of each summer visiting a new country, and then head back to Spain in the fall. I have definitely learned that I don't like fast travel at all, and that I'm better off going deeper in one place than skimming the surface of a lot of places. I do like to have some element of routine, and I'm finding that I'm much better off both personally and professionally if I can establish that for longer periods of time. So let's talk about how community impacts all of this. First of all, unless you want to cut people out of your life entirely, you're going to have to learn that all of your plans need to stay flexible. I've had to fly home for family emergencies, make specific plans around big events like weddings and milestone birthdays, and those kind of things are always going to come up. So really, I have a structure for how I would like an ideal year to look, but I have to hold that loosely and find ways to balance what I consider to be most important. Now, I do love to be in Spain, and the truth is that I have more of a community there than I do in Florida. A lot of my closest friends in Florida have moved away, and because I wasn't involved in regular activities here for so long, I just lost touch with a lot of that. But in Spain, it's more common for me to see my neighbors or even make new friends, and some of that has been because of this YouTube channel and the connections I've made. I feel a strong sense of community there. Now, you might be wondering, if I already own a home in Spain and I have a stronger sense of community there, why not just live there full time? Well, that is a great question, and I think a lot of people would choose that option. It might even be an option I choose one day far down the road. For me, it comes down to a few different factors. First, I've learned that I need to stay connected with family and friends, and that's just easier to do if I have a landing place in the US. Secondly, as a citizen and resident of the US, I'm not required to spend a specific amount of time in the States each year. But if I became a resident of Spain, there would be a requirement to be there for 6 months or more out of every year. And that might not bother a lot of people, but for me, I need more flexibility to be where I want to be when I want to be there, especially because I still travel a lot. The other factor for me is that my income still comes from the US, and there is a larger tax burden in Spain. Now, as a homeowner, I do have some tax responsibilities in Spain that I pay every year, but they aren't on my income unless I earned any rental income in Spain, in which case I would have to pay taxes on that. The only downside for me about not being in Spain more often is that it is what so many of you are interested in, but I only have about half of the year to capture the content for the whole year. And let me tell you something, it's a lot of work to make a video about one of the cities or towns in Spain. But I know that's what you want, and I'm committed to getting it done. You can probably see by now that my life is completely different today than when I took off for that first solo trip to Europe, and it has continued to grow into something I really love. And that takes us back to lesson number 1. Don't marry yourself to a specific plan. Life will bring change and growth, and you can continue to make adjustments to live your life to the fullest. One last lesson I want to mention, and that is that what you want right now might not be what you want in 5 years. And that's okay. I think it's really important to be honest with yourself. Don't let yourself feel like change means failure. When I started traveling, I was 37. Now I'm 45. And guess what? I've changed. What I like to do has changed. I'm not as willing to sleep in a hostel bed, and I'm a whole lot more likely to want to enjoy a luxury experience, and that's okay. You know, the ability to own a home in Spain and a home in the US is a privilege. I just want people to know that if there is something you really want, you can figure out creative ways to do it. I was living on a very average salary, but because I was willing to hustle and get creative, I have found ways to make my dreams come true. And you can do that too. As I always say, I can't wait to see where your dreams will take you.